Hey, listeners, are you interested in free theological training? Midwestern Seminary exists for the church, and that vision to be for the church is the reason that they provide free resources for anyone who wants to grow in their faith. How do they do that? Through the For the Church Institute, which offers free seminary-level education to any individual interested in growing in their knowledge of Scripture, knowing the Lord more deeply, and discerning their calling in ministry. With courses ranging from New Testament and theology to the doctrine of the Trinity, find out if the For the Church Institute is the right solution for you to deepen in your knowledge of Christ. Go to mbts.edu/FTCI. Again, that's mbts.edu/FTCI for the Church Institute. And while you're there, let them know that the Missions Podcast sent you. And now, on to our show. Greetings and welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Communications and Media with ABWE, joined as always by Scott Dunford, pastor of Western Hills Church in San Mateo, California. Now, Scott, I have recently made a philosophical shift in my life.
Okay.
And if you were to visit my home around this time of year, say a year or two ago, you would have found only fall decor, only autumn music. Okay, you would have found a very hard line with respect to the holidays. And now I will confess, this week, we're not normally supposed to say this, but at the date of this recording, okay, it's November 9th. I'm sorry to admit the Christmas music has started in the Kochman household. What about you? Where do you stand on this important issue?
Okay, so I love Hannah, so I'm going to defer to whatever Hannah wants, honestly. In your
Smart man.
I'm kind of shocked. And next thing I know, you're going to tell me you eat pineapple on your pizza. No, I mean, for me, I love Thanksgiving, and I realize it's not a biblical holiday, but I think it's such a good idea and something I love that's America and Canada celebrate. And also I think it fits the church calendar, right? So you have a hard break after Thanksgiving, kind of aligns with the beginning of Advent. So, I like that Advent kind of, even though I know that we really don't, if we're listening to Christmas music, it isn't very Adventy necessarily, but I kind of like that idea, of like that hard break and starting to think about it. So I'm kind of surprised that you tend to be more traditional than I am.
I know I'm usually a purist, and okay, we don't have our tree up, anything like that. That'll all wait until after Thanksgiving. So right now it's just music and one or two, movies, but Christmas is so good and the world is so nuts.
True.
Anything that's going to remind us of the fact that God stepped down into flesh, I'm going to celebrate that. We need more joy. We need a little Christmas.
I can't argue with that.
Right this very minute, some would say. Candles in the window.
It's not cold enough here for that. So but
fact.
I get that. That is I understand the impulse. I do.
Yes. Well, and something else happening this time of year, Scott, is as we gear up personally for the holiday season, churches, I've found this is usually the time where churches are starting to talk through their Christmas services. They're talking through Christmas Eve. It's the fourth quarter, so budget planning for churches and for missionaries and other parachurch ministries. I mean, it's the fourth quarter type of stuff. Another thing that comes with that is people start to think, okay, yes, the gifts, the decor, the celebration and all of that, but it is a time to give. It's a time to be generous. And so people are generally thinking about how can we pepper in some generosity, some outreach, and some love for our locality and for the globe in the midst of all of these things, right? That just comes with the territory this time of year.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and it makes sense. I think when we start thinking about the gifts of Christ and that ultimate gift of him coming into the world, it causes, I think, good Christian men and women to say, hey, we want to share that gift and that joy with other people. So I think it just is natural. Of course, you got some different things in our modern church history that kind of push that. So many mission agencies like our own heavily encourage, giving a year-end gift to your missionaries and to missions. You have Southern Baptist churches that have the big Lottie Moon Christmas offerings. So there's a big push in those churches. I think it just makes sense and it fits. And And then of course you have like Operation Christmas Child, which everyone, so many churches are involved in. So there's a lot of push at the end of the year to say, hey, and it also just, in America, why not hit 2 for 1? And we love those 2 for 1 deals. And so, yeah, also get your last tax write-offs before tax season ends.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's dive into the good, the bad, and the ugly of year-end
Yes.
outreach. Let's make this a practical one. And, let's have this conversation now before we're fully into the Advent season, Scott, because maybe at this point in the year, a lot of plans are locked into place, but not everything. And maybe this will be something where you and I can challenge, encourage each other, and hopefully other people are encouraged along the way. And so let's start with this, though. What's the best and what's the worst outreach you've seen, especially this time of year, in a church that you've been a part of? We're not going to name names. We're not going to identify people, but I know, Scott, you're a good storyteller, and I know you've seen just some interesting stuff in churches over the years, huh?
Well, the worst one is probably not a Christmas one, but you've probably seen on the internet, the church that I can't remember where they're located, and I'm glad I don't know, that every year does like a play off of a popular movie, and they redo all the songs that have the same tunes as like Lion King, for instance, but it's, the Lion of Judah King or something like that.
Oh, yeah. I've seen these going around.
Those are absolutely the worst. Absolutely the worst. But I think, I think of, one that I think of that was kind of, it had a good intention, but ended up being really bad, is that it wasn't really an outreach, but it was a ministry to their missionaries where they wanted to send Christmas gifts to all the missionary kids. And they, instead of reaching out and finding out how old the kids actually were, they just looked at the missionary cards. And I was in this church, and when I was a kid, and so they're giving kids that in the picture look like they're 5. Well, it's been years since they got a new missionary card, and so now they're in their teenager years, and they're sending them little kids' toys and whatnot. And I think that might be one of the worst things I've seen.
Good intentions. Yeah. Hey, you're never too old for a yo-yo.
No, but I'd love the idea of thinking about missionary kids at Christmas time. Like,
oh yeah,
what missionary kid wouldn't feel loved and appreciated and seen? Getting an Amazon gift card in the mail or something that actually fits their interests and desires. Yeah. But the same hand, the other side of that could be very discouraging if you like they went through all this time and money and sent me junk. That's discouraging.
That's good. That's probably there with my best. Is I can think of even things we've done in our church in the past. We'll usually do some sort of a Christmas tree, and the ornaments you take off are little things you can give, and doing that, you collect everything. And what we've done in the past is for the children in the church, they will help to create the care packages. Sometimes for the other children, there was one year where we were coloring. The children were coloring, different coloring sheets to give to one missionary, images of desert and camels in Middle East for this individual that was serving in North Africa. Just fun little ways of involving children. I love involving children in the giving time of year, and it's more blessed to give than to receive. That's probably some of the best stuff that I've seen. That's when there's relationship, when the missionary. I'll tell you what, it is easy to make fun of those churches and especially movie churches. But I'm not going to make fun of it because it's actually so sad to corrupt the worship of God so much with movies and entertainment. So if I'm really picking my worst, that's my absolute worst, is transforming your church into a movie set for some pagan piece of entertainment when we should be adoring and fearing the triune God. But that's a different topic. I'll just say the early prototype version of that. I wasn't around for this, so this would have been when my parents were younger. I think before I was in the picture, before I was even a glimmer in my father's eye, there was an early version of this type of Willow Creek model church, and they were doing the whole movie church thing around Christmas Eve. I think they might have even shown some kind of Christmas Muppet movie. Which when I think evangelism, I think the Muppets. I really do.
Well, we did have a puppet ministry in one of my churches when I was young.
Just opening hearts, really. Opening doors, opening minds, softening hearts. But this story's been told in my family. So anytime you park, those dividers that separate parking spaces, the concrete thing in between. So my family calls those Joseph the Carpenters. And the reason for that, I'm told, is apparently after this one service, I think, I could be wrong with the details again, wasn't there. There was a song sung, maybe it was even to the tune of like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or something like that. But it was a hokey song about Joseph the Carpenter, Joseph the
Mm.
Carpenter, and my dad was hopping back in the car after the service and was singing this little ditty in his head and had it stuck in his head. And because of that, plowed right over the divider and messed up his undercarriage. Maybe tore off his bumper. I don't know. Maybe I'm embellishing. But to this day, we call those little speed bumps Joseph the Carpenters. And
Oh,
maybe
that's
that's
so
entertaining. Maybe
funny.
that's not. But it is amazing the hokey nonsense that sometimes we do in the name of evangelism. Honestly, I mean, it's been so many years since I've been out of the attractional, seeker-driven church world. I look at some of it and I'm just like, man, honestly, I forget that this is even a thing. I mean, I know we're not talking about that topic. I know we're talking about outreach, but it really is incredible. I know you've seen some other more encouraging things happen, even locally in your area, Scott, with churches this time of year.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I still run into people. We're a small church. We've had our heyday, and now it's it's completely a revitalization at this point. But I run into people that have heard of our church, and one of the things that they always bring up is this big Christmas outreach they used to do, and they called it Christmas time in the city. But they did music, and it was something that people wanted to. They wanted to be reminded of something important at Christmas time, and we have a lot of people in our community that remember our church for these outreaches they used to do with music. And I even, this is not related to the outreach, but just to the Christmas season and the beauty of it. When we were living in China, we had Israeli neighbors, and I know that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why did you have Israeli neighbors in China? But we did, and we became very good friends with them. And one day, the young lady, her name was Rebecca, looked at us at Christmas time, and I think we did a little Christmas party and invited them over. And she's just like, Christmas is so beautiful. It makes me want to become a Christian. And she wasn't. That wasn't an admission of wanting to accept Christ at that point, but it did. There's something about the beauty and the seriousness and the
Yes.
peacefulness of. Of all that goes into that, and some of the good traditions that have been built down around that are inviting to lost people. We might say, little baby Jesus, and people say that, in kind of a tongue in cheek way. But boy, that is, you just can't get around the inescapable fact that God, the all powerful, almighty God, came into the world as a little baby. Like how much more vulnerable and accessible could he possibly be? That's an amazing thought. And so anything that we do at Christmas time to highlight that. I mean, when we lived a couple of years ago in Fremont, we go caroling, and in an area like ours, it is so post-Christian. Like the memory of caroling is only something seen in movies for most of our neighbors. But to have it's so unusual to have people show up at your door. And we would come to people's doors, and they knew us because we were their neighbors. But we had a whole group of church folks, and we sang Christmas carols that were about Christ. And maybe we had a few fun songs to get the kids engaged because they don't know the Christmas songs, but they loved hearing them. And when one year we didn't do it, I had my neighbors come to us and saying, "Hey, we missed that." I think those are some of the good things that we did.
I love that. I mean, it's so often in the missions world. Okay, we talk about let's strip off all of our cultural baggage in order to contextualize, and we forget that inside of those common grace things is some grace, right? That inside of all of the trappings of Christmas, there really is the fact that Christmas is the meaning of the world, right? It's the hope of the world found in the incarnation. And to hear your unbelieving friend saying that, yeah, this makes me want to become a Christian. Frankly, that's how anyone should feel looking at the goodness of Christian culture and what that can generate. But even
Yes.
going past that too, I think of some things that a lot of churches will do this time of year. They'll take up collections. They will, collect toys, or they'll collect shoes, food. Sometimes that's given locally, sometimes that's shipped off globally. And I guess, Scott, there's even a church in your backyard that's punching way above their weight in that area.
Yeah, I mean, there's a small church in our area that probably has 20 people, and they do thousands of these boxes that in outreach, and it's kind of become their whole thing. I'm not saying that's the way to go, but what I do see that is so valuable, because a group of our folks, we're part of that, is watching people engaging together. I mean, I step back and go, like, I don't know how effective the boxes are. There's things written pro and con to doing that kind of that kind of an outreach.
Right.
But the value as a pastor of watching people moving together and building community around ministry, and the conversations that are happening and the food that's being shared and the laughter, it's community building. And it's a difficult thing to you can't just artificially manufacture it, but it is something that should be, I think, a part of our thinking as pastors of how do we get people not to just, in an isolated way, drop a check in the box, or in the offering plate to just give us your money. But how do we engage their bodies, their minds, the whole community in mission together? And I think that's something that I want to keep wrestling with and thinking through, because I see the value of that. We love to be called to some purpose that we can do, and not just an individual purpose, but a community purpose, and how that builds a church in a really healthy way.
Yeah, I can think of examples, even being a part of a church that was, in a lot of ways, it's the big movie church, right? And they're doing those forms of ministry too.
Mm-hmm.
And as a pastor, you put so much emphasis into trying to get people into small groups and do all these sorts of things to connect with one another. But the relationships that we formed were in the course of different outreach and mercy ministry opportunities in our community. We got way closer with fellow church members swinging a hammer side by side than we did for hours and weeks and months of sitting around in a circle and, awkwardly eating snacks, trying to talk about some Bible teaching video that we just watched. Nothing wrong with that, but the affinity that's forged and the bond that's forged by working alongside each other, I think that's critical. I think there's probably a lot of people listening to a show like this. Let's just call it what it is. We're a show that is willing to constructively critique forms of mission and outreach that we see that maybe are healthy, maybe aren't healthy. But I think at the same time, let's talk about the example that you just shared. Maybe it is a good model, maybe it isn't, but the fact that it's forging people together and it's catechizing them in love of neighbor. And I think that's the most important thing. Is
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
There might be a point where they graduate to a different model of loving one's neighbor. But they have to learn the grammar of those things first. They have to learn the rudiments of how to give sacrificially. Scott, it's the reason that we usually give to our church online, but once in a while, if we're thinking clearly about it, we don't always, we'll give a little bit of cash just so that our daughter can experience putting it in the plate, just so she can feel that. Even though we could easily give online and do it some other way, right? It's training. The hand can actually teach the heart. The heart, needs to lead and teach the hand, but sometimes what the hand is doing can actually come back and teach the heart, right?
Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, we learned that there's a joy in giving because Grandma handed us a quarter and we put it in the plate. I was just thinking about a couple of weeks ago, or no, last week, a group of us, about 4 of us, went over to the community college across town, and it was extremely awkward in some ways, but also really rewarding. And we just walked up to students that seemed like they had nothing to do and said, "Hey, we're walking around talking to people about spiritual things. Would you like to have a conversation?" To our great surprise, a number of people did want to have a conversation about it. And while I'm very thankful for Noah and Eric, or those are the 2 guys I talked to, and hope that the conversation was a move in their life toward the gospel, I'm really excited about, Juan and Veronica and Nico and, who are the believers that went out, and the conversations we had before and after, and the camaraderie that was built, and the what that communicates to our church about evangelism, I think about Josh Daggett, a mutual friend of ours. He's been on our show talking about evangelism, but I remember it still makes me think about how he tells stories of him sharing his faith, and that helps create a culture in the church about evangelism. And I think that I like the way you said it about that. It's a type of catechism. We're creating a culture that thinks about loving our neighbors, that thinks about the gospel, that thinks about, it doesn't just think about gospel proclamation, something we just give money to, or that we deputize someone to go far away and do it, but it's something that we engage in, whether that's, getting our kids to take up a Christmas offering, whether that's blessing one of our missionaries at Christmas time in a very special way, whether that's, going door to door, singing carols and handing out candy and telling people about Jesus' love. All those things are formative.
Yeah, we were talking before we started recording, Scott, this past Halloween, we put together baggies of candy and gospel tracts, Way of the Master, fake $1 million bills, and a few other fun things like that, little comic strips from Living Waters and Ray Comfort. And our kids are putting all these together. And the kids actually answered the door every time a trick-or-treater came. And the kids were giving it to other kids, which was fun. They wanted to do that. And I'm not under the illusion that every kid is going to read those. Although we hope and pray that some do, but the almost as big a win. Obviously, salvation is the biggest win, but another huge win is just teaching our children that it's a normal thing that they can do to hand someone the gospel in a written format. I think of opportunities that we had leading some local kind of cold contact evangelistic groups when we were shortly, post-college age, that young adult season of life. And we were doing evangelism in malls and in downtown Lynchburg and different places like that, and saw relatively little fruit, although a few people did place their faith in the Lord. But we, more than that, I think of the relationships formed with somebody like my buddy, Tori Arneson, who I'm sure probably isn't listening, but if you are listening, hey, Tori, what's up, brother? But just walking the streets of town and realizing like we're two brothers in Christ that both have a heart to be sharing our faith, and how the Lord works in those opportunities. You make friends in ministry foxholes in ways like that you just don't when you're comfortably sipping lattes in the atrium of your church. And so I think that that's critically important. And maybe what we can do, Scott, is just fuel. We've already done it, but let's fuel our listeners and ourselves and other people that might be joining us listening to this way down the line, maybe even years into the future, with more of these ideas and things that, okay, we've talked about healthy and unhealthy ways of doing it. What are some ways you can get your people involved, whether it's the holiday season or whether it's any time of year that could potentially bear fruit, both in not only connecting with people's hearts, but creating that value of serving in the people that you're ministering to. Maybe it's your life group, maybe it's your church members, maybe it's your fellow missionary teammates if you're listening from overseas, whoever your people are, your family, your own children. How can you build those habits, that muscle memory of outreach effectively?
Yeah. So maybe we talk about local first, then we could talk about some global things.
Yeah,
but
let's
like
do that.
Locally, think about your neighbors first. Like I know people that they go out soul winning every week, but they don't even know the names of their neighbors. And I just think, what are you doing? So start with your neighbors. It might just be as simple as, getting a little, we had ended up having a little tradition in our neighborhood here in Fremont, where every single Christmas we'd knock on their door and we give them a little gift, usually some cookies or something that my wife made. One year we ordered some things from our home, and because they knew we were out in Michigan, and so we got some cherry stuff from Michigan, and pretty soon like all of our neighbors are coming by every day, every Christmas, and they're giving us local San Francisco stuff, and it just created a fun tradition of gift giving, and that became the foundation of relationship building. I know another family that they do a Christmas like a Christmas party, and they invite the neighbors, and it ends with the reading of the Christmas story. And even these non-Christian neighbors are delighted to sit and hear a story about Christmas. It's just every place I've ever lived, Muslim places, secular Chinese settings, people understand, hey, it's Christmas. Let's do this thing, and they're open to it at that time. So I think that is a great starting with your neighbors. But then another area I think churches overlook is thinking about like, what does their community value? And like almost every city has some effort at Christmas time, whether it's the police doing a toy drive or the city doing some kind of coat drive for needy kids. Like, why do we have to have everything centered on come to our building to do it? Because we're not just trying to reach, like the poor, but if we join with what they're saying that they value and we're bringing value to them, like we're also ministering to the police who are doing the police drive, or the city council members who are doing the coat drive. Like, why not engage in what your community is engaged in and tell them that's a good thing, but also let them see the value of your church and engage with those things. I think those are a couple ways. And this is so basic that it almost doesn't need to be said, but it hit me a couple years ago. We sent out flyers to our community, inviting them to church on our Advent services and our Christmas Eve candlelight service. And we had a Muslim man walk in. And I said, his name was Muhammad, so it's pretty obvious. And I said, what brought you to church tonight? And he said, I got a flyer in the mail that said I was welcome to come. And it never crossed, to me, that was so like obvious. Of course, you're welcome. We're a church. But to non-Christians, they don't know that they're welcome. And they need an invitation. And so taking that time to create a special invitation to a service that might introduce them to the gospel, I think is a great time at Christmas. It is a time when nominal Christians and non-Christians are interested in coming and being a part and finding out more about what it is we're doing in those buildings.
I think we tie ourselves in knots, assuming that people are going to be hardened and resistant so many times.
Yes.
And often they are, but often they're not. And that often keeps me, just being honest, from taking that first step so often. I can think of a couple of things that aren't specifically all holiday related, although maybe a little bit, that I know of that I've seen people do lately that I just want to like cheer them on and say, these are great efforts. Number one, again, thinking locally, our local crisis pregnancy resource center is involved in a number of ways in the community, but one of them is inviting their donors to adopt a family. So they have people who are either going through parenting classes who have saved their children. Some of them are receiving counseling and care post-abortion and being discipled and being taught, okay, what does the gospel say about this that's happened in your life? And how can we form you into someone who's submitting their life to Christ, right? These are the families, not just individual women, but families that this pregnancy resource center is ministering to. Many of them are below the poverty line. Many of them have small children, a lot of single moms, and unable to provide for a full Christmas for their children. I love the idea of adopting a specific family through this pregnancy center ministry and loving on them, giving their children gifts. Because are there opportunities to do that for people overseas and people in faraway places? Yes, but how cool to do that in your own backyard, number one. And number two, to be able to do that where there's also believers in this ministry that have long form context for relationship with the people that are receiving these gifts. And you can just come alongside them and help them in the work that they're already doing. I love that.
Can I just add on to that one? I know a church out here that does it, but they do like a cheap store. So they get people to donate expensive presents, and then it gives dignity to the parents to be able to buy their own gifts for their kids. And so they will let the parents come in and buy expensive toys at a fraction of what they would normally cost, so it does two things. It's blessing those families, but it's also allowing the parent the dignity of buying the presents for the kids, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. Some other things, again, this is a little Christmassy. I believe it was around this time last year. Maybe I'm fuzzy on the timeline. So someone actually here that I work with here at ABWE, her church, which is kind of a non-denominational church. It's not the type of church that you would maybe think of as doing this, hosted an orchestra night for Handel's Messiah to be performed and treated it as outreach. And, all the experts and the consultants tell us that the way to get the unbeliever in is to have skinny jeans and rock music. but
Hmm.
people are hungry for things that are older, for things that point to the past, for things that point to sort of this ghost of Christendom that still haunts our culture from time to time. What is this beautiful arrangement of music, and what does it mean? Of course, Handel's Messiah is basically the book of Isaiah set to Scripture. The gospel is dripping off every page of sheet music, and it made a lot of sense as an outreach to be able to give some exposition, share what it means, but then also listen to these songs that are cultural heritage as well as a spiritual heritage there too. So I love the thinking of not being afraid to be, especially around the Christmas
Hmm.
time, or not afraid to be churchy. Because, like you're saying, sometimes people are actually drawn to Christian culture because it's different from what they're used to. Don't be afraid to be churchy. That might be a unique point of interest for you as a missionary in another country. Is, you know what? Do all the churchy, Christmassy things, because the people where you're serving, they might be drawn in. What is this? And they might be intrigued by that. And then another thing that I'll share, actually, Chase Davis, friend of the show, he's been on. Chase recently just set up on a local college campus and said, "Hey, I'm a pastor. Ask me anything." And set up a little booth and a table. And I love the idea, rather than sort of tiptoeing your way into conversations by talking about neutral things, the idea of just inviting it, like you were doing on your local college campus there as well, and just saying, "Hey, do you want to talk about spiritual things?" Or, "I'm a pastor. Ask me anything." And people have spiritual questions.
Hmm.
Modernism, this idea of just naturalistic materialism, less and less popular. People are interested in the idea of the vaguely spiritual, whatever that means. And
Hmm.
they've got a lot of questions for somebody who might be a Christian pastor. Just inviting that,
Yeah.
baiting your hook with, let's talk about spiritual things, and then seeing what kind of fish you attract with that. There's so many things that we can do here to think outside the box, but we also want to think globally, right, Scott?
Yeah. So, globally, I think, obviously a lot of Christians do a Christmas, either a Christmas message or Christmas lead up. Like this year, I'm doing a whole series on evangelism and world missions, leading up to Christmas time, because we do a big Christmas offering. But I think globally, thinking of missionary kids, I think that's a great way, and that's something you can get your kids ministries involved with. I know a church that they had their kids take, they put the pictures of the families. Every Sunday school adopted a missionary kid. Every Sunday school class adopted a missionary kid, and they took an offering throughout the year that the kids then gave to that missionary family. And that what an awesome blessing that is. So that'd be like one idea of, I think, that something a church could do.
I don't have a lot else to add to that, Scott. Obviously, we're talking about the globe all the time here on the show, and lots of ideas all over ABWE's website. But one thing that I'll just point to, I've been encouraged by this. I've seen it in our church in small ways where we've invited Live Global. Live Global is a ministry division of ABWE focused primarily on celebrating and lifting up the national partner who's already doing hard things
Mm,
for the sake of the gospel, with or without the help of Western missionaries. And a lot of them are just doing phenomenal ministry. And we've had a handful of Live Global missionaries and partners visit our church this year, and just seeing people give sacrificially and sight unseen. They haven't
mm,
taken short term trips to these places. They've maybe
mm,
read a brochure, or they've watched a video, they've heard a 10, 15-minute presentation. But that alone, for some of them, just the step of faith of, you know what, I'm going to give above my tithe sacrificially, even when it hurts a little bit. I'm going to write this check because the Lord's moving in my heart to do that, just because I want to love on these brothers and sisters overseas. And, with that, there's not as much the emotional payoff of bundling goods to ship somewhere. There's not the immediate visible fruit, but that's what I love about it, is that there's actually not a lot of personal payoff at all, except for the benefit of having helped another brother or sister in the Lord overseas. And the fact that even without all of the bells and whistles and things that come with doing a visible outreach, that still the Spirit works in the hearts of people to give generously, even if it's just financially, even if it's just in terms of prayer, seeing believers in Christ loving other brothers and sisters in the Lord, whether it's Christmas or any other time of year, that moves my heart, especially when you know it's not a church that's missions saturated. It's just an ordinary thing that Christians do because the Holy Spirit's at work in them and they love the brothers. What an awesome thing to see. And Scott, maybe that's the best thing that we can leave people with is, you know what, take one of these ideas or don't take one of these ideas. Maybe you got all your plans locked away. Maybe just the smallest thing is the thing that you can try in your church or in your family or on the mission field this year. But you know, the Spirit works through the hearts of his people when we step out in these small ways. And you never know what the Lord might do through your ministry this time of year and any time all throughout the year as we seek to serve him on mission. And so we hope you've enjoyed this conversation today on the Missions Podcast. You can get more of this show at missionspodcast.com. The Missions Podcast is a ministry of ABWE, which is a global family of ministries with 1,000 missionaries reaching 84 countries for almost 100 years now, devoted to evangelism, church planting, and training national leaders to carry on the task. If you're interested in learning more about them, go to abwe.org. If this show has been an encouragement to you, let us know. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review in your podcast platform of choice that'll help other people discover the content and be blessed by it. And you can drop us a note as well. Email Scott or Alex, Scott@missionspodcast.com and Alex@missionspodcast.com are our email addresses. We'd love to hear from you with ideas, questions, topics to consider, guests to suggest. We are interested in all of it. Go ahead and drop us a note. And until next week, go make disciples of all nations and maybe even in your own backyard too. And we'll see you next week.